Welcome to First a Follower podcast, presented by Youth for Christ USA. First a Follower aims to address the unique challenges and opportunities youth ministry leaders face today. Through engaging discussions and expert insights, we aim to provide practical guidance, relevant resources, and support for the spiritual formation of youth leaders as they navigate the complexities of reaching and discipling the next generation. I'm your host, Cory Huffman, and I work on the YFC USA Leader Formation Team. And on this episode, I'm welcoming on Youth for Christ Ministry Leader Shelby Nyboer and Young Life Associate Regional Director, Speaker, and Author, Dr. Tanita Maddox. Shelby works for West Michigan Youth for Christ as an Area Director and Campus Life Director. She also serves on the Youth Leader Advisory Board for Youth for Christ International. Dr. Tanita Maddox is the National Director for Generational Impact and an Associate Regional Director for Young Life. Tanita has served as a Young Life leader with adolescents for over 26 years and is the author of What Gen Z Really Wants to Know About God, 7 Questions About Life and Faith. On this episode, we're digging into the questions that Gen Z are asking. All right, it's First to Follower podcast here with a couple of friends. Hi, Shelby. How are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Doing good. Shelby's with West Michigan YFC doing Campus Life. And then with Young Life, we've got Tanita Maddox. How are you doing, Tanita?
It's sunny outside, so it's a good day.
Yeah, this time of year, we're starting to move in that direction. So that's pretty good. And Tanita, you work with Young Life both nationally and also locally with Spokane as well, right?
That's right. And I'm still a volunteer Young Life leader with the kids.
Awesome. So we all have kind of got like a different kind of scope. So you're an expert on Gen Z, and then Shelby does direct ministry, campus life ministry, but also Shelby's kind of a big deal because she's also on the Presidential Advisory Board for Youth for Christ International? Is that the right term, or is it something different?
Young Leaders Advisory Board, or otherwise known as YLAB.
YLAB. Okay. Young Leaders.
I like that.
Cool. And she's a member of Gen Z, which is the group of people we're going to be talking about today. So nice to have some representation there. Well, cool. Well, as we jump in, we're going to be talking about, Tanita, your wonderful book that I know both enjoyed, What Gen Z Really Wants to Know About God, 7 Questions About Life and Faith. And I know that, Tanita, you wrote this book, but you've been studying and researching and doing so much work with Gen Z in that area for a long, long time. Okay, so first hard-hitting question, as you think about all the work you've been doing, the research, the listening, what's one thing that you just hate about Gen Z? No, just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Don't say that. Don't answer it. Just kidding. No, quite the opposite. What's something that you really love about Gen Z? How about that?
There's ways they have changed our culture and changed now our professional cultures. And one of the things I appreciate is they have flattened out the hierarchy that most of us were used to. So they're not really bound by like someone's title or level in an organization. They have no problem going to someone like above your head or to your boss's boss. But because of that, they're actually making us better much faster than we would have been because they're offering real life ground feedback. They're teaching our supervisors how to take feedback and how to apply it in real time. And I think they're really improving our systems much faster than they would have been.
Awesome. Okay, Shelby, what do you love about Gen Z?
Yeah, when it comes to Gen Z, I mean, it's my brothers and my friends and my colleagues. And so getting to call them family and to do life with them means to be challenged every day. We say the honest and most honest truth. I think a little bit of our filter has gone out the window over the years, which I deeply appreciate because we say it how it is and we desire for us to grow and for people to change and to look like the best versions of themselves. And so you can't do life with Gen Z without knowing what's the most true thing that they know, and it'll be said out loud. And so I think doing life and calling them friends means like being challenged every single day and being forced to grow, whether you like it or not.
Okay, so that's a good start just to kind of warm up. We're coming into this. I think sometimes older generations might look back on other generations and have all these different, ideas about them, but hopefully we'll dig in and help people understand a little bit better. As we set up this conversation, Tanita, I know that depending who is doing the research or who's sharing, they may have a different idea of kind of what's the age range. So would you define for us maybe a couple of things? One, what is the age range you're talking about when you say Gen Z? And then what are some of the maybe significant markers of this generation as well that you would note?
If you use the birth years of 1997 to 2012, meaning they were born between 1997 and 2012, those are pretty widely accepted years for Gen Z. It always gets squishy on the ends, like always. Yeah. And so I usually tell people, if you were born between 1994 and 1998, you probably have one foot in millennials and 1 foot in Gen Z, and you may not fit completely in one or the other. But after 99, you're going to be really in Gen Z. And then there's a lot of conversation these days about when does Gen Alpha start. There's a lot of bad information that's floating around about there because it's a very competitive market. People want to be the first to say, I know who these people are, but it's going to be squishy on the end until they get a little bit older.
Okay. That's helpful.
You were asking for some of the markers.
And what are some of
what
some of the markers that you would say?
Yeah, Jean Twenge, who's known for her generational research, will say technology has a big impact on generational shifts because it changes how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to the world around us. So with millennials who got the internet, that was very exciting. Gen Z had access to smart and interactive technology in their hands from a very young age. And so tablets, smartphones, those kinds of things, that became part of their experience growing up. And so that was a big marker of that shift. One thing that happened is that one of the first groups to study Gen Z were mental health field, psychologists, sociologists, therapists, because they were seeing a rise in mental health difficulties and challenges. And so they started to dive in first. So the most early research we get on Gen Z is from the mental health field. And so that has become a generational marker of just this big rise in anxiety and loneliness and depression and suicide ideation and self-harm and suicides. So all these things have come up with them. And that's one thing I think greater society has been, I don't know what to do with this because this is what's happening with our young people. And then Gen Z as they're growing up, they have this huge value of safety. And that was new on the scene for many of our older generations. Is all of a sudden our young people were asking, is it safe? Am I safe? Redefining what safe meant. And that was a big shift for this generation. I like that you're nodding along, Shelby. It makes me feel very affirmed right now.
Yeah. As I read the book, I just felt like you were reading my mail. Everything that you were saying, I was like, yep. And that sounds like me and my friends and the students I work with. So yeah, definitely affirming it.
That's really good. Yeah. And I think other things, because obviously this generation was very much in like a formative time going through COVID, right? I know at least like especially the younger, my daughter was just going into sixth grade as she was, as COVID hit. And then I think it was from Josh Packard, I read that they are the loneliest generation. Gen Z is the loneliest generation, which I know is significant compared to normally it's the oldest generation as their, maybe friends or family are dying off and those kinds of things. So yeah, so there's a lot going on. One other kind of question I want to throw out to both of you guys, and then we can dig more into some other significant pieces of the book. But I want to ask the question of what is a stereotype or any stereotypes that you think of that maybe you would say aren't totally true or are just really misunderstood. So Tanita, from your listening and research, Shelby, from your existing and being a Gen Z person, I'd love to hear from each of you if there's something that you think of that like other generations, other people would stereotype Gen Z and you're like, well, that's not really, either that's not true or you're just thinking about it totally wrong.
I feel like I should let Shelby go first because she's the actual Gen Zer.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that comes to mind instantly, and it's a stereotype, obviously, because it's true sometimes. So you will come across this, but I think there's a stereotype that Christian Gen Zers don't trust the Bible. Like all of us, we don't think it's true. We don't like it. We like have qualms with some of it. So I think like, and Tanita, you talked a whole bunch about absolute truth and those types of things. So I'm excited to talk more about that. But I think there's a reality that there are a lot of us who are searching and do know and have rooted confidence in absolute truth. And I think sometimes that gets splattered around that like all of us are just in our feels all day long, just going by whatever the wind blows. That's kind of what we do. So I think sometimes there's that stereotype that we're flaky and can get pushed over by the wind in a moment. But there is deep roots, for many of us, not all of us, but we'll talk about that more.
That's so good. Because you're right. Like you bring up such a good point that anytime you're talking about generational study, what we're looking for is what a large population of people generally has in common. And the larger that population is, and we're talking about the first global generation, like this is the first truly global generation where the term Gen Z is being used with the same birth years around the world for the same group of people. So you're talking about over 2 billion people that we're saying generally these people have these things in common. And so it's never going to take into account, family dynamics or personal experiences or how you grew up and all these different things that are so nuanced. And that's the downside of doing generational work is it bypasses the individual for what the crowd is going to reflect. And I think you do a great job, Shelby, of just unpacking like there's a lot of nuance on this. So don't just hear Gen Z and think that everyone fits into this box, because that's absolutely true. And I agree with you. I hear a lot from our Gen Zers that when I ask them, what do you hear about themselves? It's often fragile and weak and over emotional. And I think that's really unfair, because what's happening is Gen Z is strong in different ways than previous generations needed to be strong. And so if I'm just looking for what I experienced as an adolescent and what I think you should reflect, because that's what I did when I was 15, then I'm going to miss it. But instead, when we look at Gen Z's actual experience, we will find that I get weepy every single time, you guys, that they're not weak, that they are incredibly strong. That I was talking to a Gen Zer, and it's more like they've been like trees in a hurricane. And so we're like, why are you blowing around? And you're like, because there's a hurricane. But their roots are much deeper than I think people can see or understand, because they're looking for something different. They're not really paying attention to Gen Z for who they really are.
That's good. I feel like I've heard, and also I think I mistakenly would have stereotyped a little bit that maybe Gen Z tends to be like less motivated, or sometimes a little bit lazy, just wants to stay home, wants to do this. And I've got a 17-year-old daughter who I've kind of watched do some things where I'm like, when I was your age, right? All these things, I had a job, I did this, I was doing all these things, and you feel overwhelmed doing this or doing this. And more recently, especially in kind of looking at some of these studies and trying to understand a little bit better, I think that, to me, the piece of like knowing that they have a phone in front of their face that's giving them all the bad things that are happening in the world all at once, and like all of these opinions and, obviously misinformation that they got to navigate through, and kind of realizing the mental piece of it that I did not have to deal with as a high schooler that they do, and kind of going, okay, maybe they're they are truly overwhelmed and a little bit depressed and all these things, because they're carrying so much more of a mental weight than our generation did. And I think a lot of older folks who aren't digging in don't really see that, and it's easy to miss that too. So yeah.
I mean, think about when I was in high school, we had never heard of anyone bringing a gun onto campus. Yeah. It didn't exist, right? And now my children are in they just had an active shooter drill a couple days ago. Like, this is a part of their reality that I never had to cope with.
So true. So true. Yeah. And when bad things did happen, you catch a headline, or even something like, even the early school shootings or different things, they were big news, but you didn't have to react in real time, and I just think there's a lot there that you can unpack with that. I think that's good. So hopefully, as people listen to that, especially if they're not in Gen Z, through this conversation, through looking at your book and continuing to digging in, they can start to unpack and maybe take a step back and have some understanding, and not just the stereotypes. But okay, as we dig in, again, this is a really great book. Shelby, you read through this. I want to start with you on this. As you kind of read through this book, I would love to know, and I'm sure Tanita would love to know too, what was kind of your experience kind of reading through this, and then maybe what was something that really stood out to you as kind of a big aha, or just something really helpful?
Yeah, I think instantly right off the the introduction, like, brought me right into the reality of some of the things that we face, and also the reality of, like, a contextualized gospel presentation is so necessary for our generation, that it is so nuanced and it is so subjective. So being able to actually understand the person and the reality that they're walking through, and have a nuanced gospel presentation that's still based on absolute truth, that there is still one gospel that has never changed and never will. That reality captivated me from the beginning, and made me ask the questions, okay, so why are we missing, or how are we not presenting this nuanced gospel in the right way? And as you started asking these 7 questions, I started reading it, and I was like, yeah, but, like, what about this? And then the next chapter would, like, go the step deeper. And I was like, yeah, okay, yep. And now what about this? We've, like, asked, like, what is true, because we don't know what, like, everyone is feeling. Everything's a little bit different for every person. And then all of a sudden it was like the next chapter talking about the depths of, like, okay, how do we redefine safety, and what is actual safety for this generation, and how do we ask the right questions? And so I guess I just kept reading every chapter, recognizing, oh, this is answering the next question, and made me feel so understood as I was reading it, being like, wow, there is people who are seeking understanding for the way that we think. And it also affirmed a lot of the ministry that I get to do with some of the young people that I do life with every day. And so I think the biggest takeaway is that I think sometimes that Gen Z, we get jaded by the people who have casted so many stereotypes over us, that we're just saying, like, oh, people don't actually care to fight to understand us anymore. And so we have to fight to be heard. We have to fight to be seen. We have to either, like, give up or keep fighting so that everyone will understand every word that comes out of our mouth. And I think what happened in this book, and my big aha moment, is that there are people who want to continue to fight to understand the way that we see the world. And as we do that, there's so many principles that will carry over from generation to generation that we can take. And as we continue to understand what's happening in Gen Z, it'll help us understand what's happening in Gen Alpha better, simply by just principles that we see in personhood, but also inside of Christianity, of what does it look like to sit and listen to people? What does it look like to actually understand what is actual trust? How do we build trust? And I started recognizing the realization of, like, almost like emotional maturity and these types of, like, things coming to the surface as I was reading this. I was like, oh, there's a generation who wants to teach us and wants to learn from us about the way that we see the world, and the empathy that we carry from conversation to conversation and experience to experience, that as they seek to understand, there's actually a unity that is so beautiful, and it's being birthed left and right. And so I think that was my biggest aha, is, like, sometimes I feel like people don't want to understand our kids. They don't want to understand the students that we work with. They don't want to understand us as the next leaders inside of organizations. And inside of this book, I recognize, wow, there's some actual tools and people who actually care to do the hard and gritty work to understand where we're coming from.
You're going to make me cry, Shelby.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, and on that note, I mean, just in response to that a little bit, like, thinking about, Tanita, you doing this work, going through all of this, and maybe working with, like, some older generations, who are also supervising younger people or working with younger people themselves. How important is it to do this work and begin to understand this generation, and maybe what's that done for you as you've dug in and understood or learned about Gen Z? How's that maybe changed or impacted the way that you see them, work with them, and maybe some of the other people that are also an older generation trying to supervise or work with Gen Z as well? Well,
your question really uncovers a piece of where I think most of us struggle, is we don't see generations as different cultures. Mm-hmm. I think if we said, hey, you're going to go do a mission trip and you're going to a different country, why is it important to understand? It makes sense to all of us. Like, well, of course, I want to be able to speak the language. I want to be respectful. I want to be able to share the gospel in a way that makes sense to the people I'm talking to, but we don't often look at the people around us and think that that's a different culture, especially when they're in our own household. And then because we assume we're in the same culture, that's where all the misunderstandings happen. That's where all the mistakes happen, because we're assuming we're speaking the same language and that we have the same experiences and we should have the same values, that we're using words the same way. And then really quickly it falls apart.
Yeah.
So I think
So good.
as we stop and go, I wish I remember what book it was that said we only belong to one generation. Like that's the only one we can belong to. We can't belong to multiple. And so, figuring out, except for maybe our cuspers who understand two generations at once, we have to, once we realize, okay, this is a culture and I'm talking about a different culture, I think it puts us in a different posture to say, okay, different language, different dress, different values, different taboos, different mores, and then we start to go there. I think even when you look at the questions that are listed in this book, if you just open to the table of contents, I think without reading it, I might go, I'm a Gen Xer. I ask these questions in life. I can answer it. I got it. I don't need to read it. I can just answer this question. And but the whole point is, if you don't understand where the question is coming from and the experiences that surrounded it, we're going to give a wrong answer is what's going to happen. And that's really what was happening to me as a young life leader is I was giving wrong answers to the questions, or I wasn't even addressing the questions at all. I was just talking about what I thought was important. And that really creates a space where the gospel, where Jesus Christ, or the Bible are going to become increasingly irrelevant to our young people because we have not learned how to make it relevant to their everyday life and their everyday experiences. So for me, it's been the biggest impact it's had on me is my own understanding of scripture. I always knew, like I was taught, hey, the Bible is good news for everyone, everywhere, throughout history and across the world. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Until I really started looking in scripture for answers to the questions that Gen Z were asking, which were not my questions. When I started to find the Bible actually addressed their questions and their experiences that weren't mine, it really did actually start to click and go, oh my goodness, like the Bible really does answer the questions of every culture and every people around the world. So that's been huge. That was a really huge benefit of getting to do this.
So good. It's so good. I think it'd be good, for our listeners too. Obviously, I hope everybody gets the book and reads it, but I just wanted to read the 7 questions that you list out and talk about in the book, just to kind of help people understand where we're coming from, what we're talking about. And then Shelby, I want to give you space to see what are some questions that maybe you have. So, or things that maybe you'd push back on, or just want to dig deeper on, with Tanita as well. So the 7 questions are, is God good? Am I enough? Will you accept me? Do all people matter to God? Can I trust you? What is true? And am I safe? Those are big questions. Those are big questions. All right, Shelby, what are some things maybe that as you're reading this that maybe you have questions on or really want to dig deeper in with Tanita today?
Yeah, it's so fascinating that you're just talking about if we don't understand why, or even the circumstances that surround them asking these questions, we're going to misunderstand it in the first place. And as I started recognizing maybe some of the definitions or the context behind some of these questions with myself, my friends, or even the students I work with, I started recognizing that some of these questions are asking the same thing from the same context. So the conversations of, am I enough and will you accept me, feel really similar inside of the context of like this identity crisis that's happening inside of our generation. The can I trust you and what is true and am I safe? I think all of those types of questions are surrounded upon like the subjectivity that we're experiencing, and will you take the time necessary to understand me, or will you just understand my context? Will you just understand the things that I do in my life, or will you actually fight to understand me? And as I read those, I started recognizing there's just a different depths that each of those questions label and find out. And as I put those questions even in front of some of my friends as I was reading this book, I was like, what do you guys think about these questions? And they were like, yeah, those seem really valid and seem really true. I even was talking to one of my students about it as I was reading the book, and they were like, I think sometimes though we get stuck in maybe we know the answer, maybe even someone has given us a good enough head, like knowledge response to these questions, and we understand what they're coming from, and they've taken the time to even understand us. But I think that the thing that stood out to me is sometimes we get stuck in like, how do we actually get our feet to actually move behind some of the answers that our head actually knows? And I think that that's the paralysis that I think our generation experiences, whether that's the intake of media and knowing too many things sometimes is the paralysis, but also the overwhelming emotional experience that happens behind some of these truths. So Tanita, I would even love for you to expand on like the what now, that part of like, now that we know these things as a generation, what would your advice be to our generation to say, like, even as we start answering these questions properly, we might have it in our head. How do we move some of this information to our heart so that our feet actually start to move and we actually start to live out these experiences that we're understanding and questions that we're starting to answer properly?
Yeah, you're bringing out a challenge that I think is a significant challenge and is a necessary challenge. And I think y'all will usher in this new season for the church because it has to be addressed, which is, as I was even just doing the research, it's most of our content that is designed for adolescents is vertical, like it's between you and your personal relationship with God. But it's not limited to adolescent materials, though that is a lot of what I read. It's just what's happening in a lot of churches is we focus on your personal relationship with Jesus. So it is a vertical thing. Think about how most of our churches are set up, or at least all the churches I've gone to, there are rows facing the front. It's an individualized experience. Most of our worship is actually individualized songs about how I feel about God. And so when you have all that focus on the vertical, there's not a lot to show our young people of like, well, how is this expressed horizontally? Right. Like, I'm glad that I know this, but how does that impact my everyday life? What does it mean about how I do my calendar and how I like spend my money and what a job I should apply for and how I should interact with my coworkers, my friends, and which classes should I apply for? We haven't explained, older generations haven't explained necessarily how our faith seeps into all the little and big things in our life. We're not saying it out loud or explaining those connections. We're assuming that people would know that they're there. But what's happened is really Gen Z is assuming that it's not there. There's no connection into that unless we actually say what it is. And so I think that is a big challenge that we have to address. And if we don't start addressing, we're going to become, again, more increasingly irrelevant. Like you said, it's going to be stuck in our head. But we got to figure out how to practice this in the little tiny ways, which is why I think the call for mentoring that Gen Z has brought up is such an incredible opportunity and so needed, because mentoring is really those things. Yeah. Hey, it's not going through a worksheet, at a coffee shop. It's come over to my house, while we're doing like our spring cleaning or our Saturday chores or over for dinner or all these things, because we have then the opportunity to explain how my relationship with Jesus actually impacts the things that we're doing in my everyday life. So these are the little things. Or they're just hanging out, man. They can just come over, watch the game or have family dinner. And they do that enough weeks where they can start put things together. And you are now a place where they can bring these questions because they've seen you live your life on a regular basis. So we have to figure out how to explain how it impacts these things. It might even start with a journal. Like, let me just take the first 2 hours of my day and figure out, how does what I believe about this impact how I live the first 2 hours of my day? As we're not making those connections, and it's time to.
Yeah, in your chapter about what is true, that question, you brought up the comment about being a witness and like what a witness actually is and how we witness to the world saying what we see. And I think that my friends make fun of me all of the time because the ministry model that I encourage my ministry leaders towards is I say, you need to give people access. The more access that they have to your life, the more testimonies that they get to share because they see a lived experience like what you're saying. The more access that a student gets to my life, the more that they recognize that I do mess up. So it gives a humanity to me, but it also shows the supernatural nature of what God has done through me and continues to do through me. And I remember this story. This is the one I always tell my people when I talk about what giving access actually looks like. Is I was in the car driving to a worship night with one of my students, we're running late because I didn't put gas in my car before the gathering. So I drove to a gas station to fill up gas then. And so we're running 15 minutes late and this car cuts right in front of me. And I slam on my brakes and I'm like so mad. I'm like, are you kidding me? I throw my hands in the air and it's just me and my student in this car. And I have this moment and I'm just like, the car's silent. She's laughing at me, whatever. And then all of a sudden I hear the Lord just prompt me in my heart, just say like, repent out loud. And I was like, okay, right. And so I had this moment where in real time, I'm talking to God out loud, like my student isn't in the car with me, where I'm like, God, we're late because I decided to not steward my time well. And so I'm sorry. Like, would you fill me with grace? Thank you for your forgiveness. Even in small moments like this, would you teach me how to be a person of patience? And would I see the fruit of patience exist in my life? And to this day, she's a sophomore in college now, newer since for the last 4.5 years. And she still brings up that moment. Just to make fun of me because she says that I still have road rage. That's the only context that it's brought up in, but simply like this moment of pure access that she had to me in that moment actually transformed the way that she got to see my humanity and the way that I live out my life. And she says it out loud all the time about my ability to admit my faults. And I think that that's what our generation is craving, is for people to, set a table for us. One of my favorite books talks about this concept of radically ordinary Christian hospitality being this place where we see evangelism starting to meet a generation. And so I think it's beautiful what you talk about being a witness. I think it's 100% what our generation is craving, what we're asking for, and what we hopefully will see change inside of the church in the few coming years.
It kind of feels like to me, as you say that, Shelby, because I mean, when, in YFC, we talk a lot about 3-story relationships and 3-story ministry, my story connecting to God's story, connecting to a kid's story. And it's very relational. It's time, time spent together. And I felt like when I was in high school and I was a part of Campus Life, my Campus Life Director would just bring me along driving to do errands and different things. And kind of like as you're saying that, I remember him praying at times in the car as we were driving, and but just being together in that relational piece. And it seems like maybe it's coming out of COVID and having, not just a generation that's online a lot, but also everybody found the convenience of like, we can just, you have influencers, you can do church online, all these things where instead of going where people are, we can just put stuff out. And, so it kind of seems like, and this is sort of a statement and a question a little bit of like, it seems like that maybe a little bit of that craving is to do with maybe some of us doing ministry need to, step it up a little bit and get out there a little bit more and not just wait for kids to come, or not just put things out there for big groups, but get back to that kind of like small groups, one-on-one kind of experiences. And not to say, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are doing that, but yeah, maybe that's one of the pieces that's missing a little bit too. I don't know.
Yeah, there's like accountability and trust. There's accountability and trust that happens when we start giving people access to our lives, where it forces them, if they actually get a close inside view of my life, what would they actually see? And when we start opening up our doors inside of ministry, would they see the chaos? Through the chaos, would they see Jesus as well, or would they just see the chaos? And I think sometimes we're scared to open the doors because sometimes we're scared to show people what's behind them.
Oh, you just uncovered something. I was chatting with a baby boomer couple at my church, and I was saying, listen, like when you have someone for dinner, you don't need to clean the whole house and put the tablecloth down. Like they just want to know what your life looks like. And she about had a heart attack. She was like, no. I'm like, you don't need to be disrespectful. Don't treat them like an afterthought, but also they would like to see what your life really looks like. They don't want to see the cleaned up version.
Right in front of them. If we didn't clean our house up for people coming over, we would never have it cleaned up. Okay. So. Right. One thing that stood out to me, just in the experience piece that we're talking about, I think plays into this a bit, but it's in the chapter on Is God Good, page 29, you talk about the evidence of existence of God can you prove God is real? And you say, though I will say, when it comes to this question, Gen Z is looking for an experience with God to know he is real, not a local apologetic or well-orated answer. And that one sticks out to me because I just had an experience. My wife and I lead the high school group at our church, and I had a student who was sitting out in the hall and has grown up in the church. His parents go to church. He's grown up in it. And I went and chatted with him, and he was like, I don't think, I think maybe I'm an atheist, or I don't know, like I'm forced to come. And like, I'm, starting to uncover, and I'm thinking, of course, apologetics in my mind. What do I got to say to help convince him or help him know? And he's like, I just haven't felt God. And he started just talking fully about experience. And it kind of threw me off because I was more thinking about like ways I can sort of share. And then I had to just kind of backtrack and go, okay. And this was, I think worship was happening in the other room, and we're about to have a message, and another leader who was going to speak. And I just said, well, okay, maybe it means you got to take a step of faith and be a little bit open. And we just talked a little bit about that kind of stuff. And he was still kind of like, I don't know. And this, and I was able to get him to at least come in and sit, and just told him like, hey, you don't have to believe anything. Just be with us, hang out. But I'm still kind of thinking about, okay, what do I need to do with him, and how do I kind of approach that, in the right way? So it's easy to think about it from step back, but then in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh. So I don't know if you would say anything about that, or some other conversations or spaces you've been in to help encourage kids who maybe, aren't ready, aren't wanting the apologetics part of it, but maybe aren't, gonna just make themselves vulnerable and open themselves up to this experience either. They're like, God, come give me this experience, but I'm staying closed off. I don't know. For either of you guys, what have you seen with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, God's not a feeling, and that's a really hard place to really share with our young people too, because the most of the cultural context around them has said that your feelings are really important. Like your experiences can dictate what truth is. And there's some concern moving forward with AI, becoming more and more common. Just even our high school kids are like, I don't know what to believe. I don't know what's real unless you're like standing in front of me. Like, so it's like the knowledge piece is starting to be, anyone can say anything and anyone can create anything. So how am I going to know what's like really real unless I feel it and experience it? Yeah. And that's just a place that I don't know if we don't really fix it. We just understand that that's where our young people are navigating the world. And then help them say, understand that God's not a feeling. And that chasing a feeling will often lead us into not great spaces in general. But to mostly like understand and empathize with the fact that they're looking for something that they want and they can't find. And that's really hard to say. I really want to believe this, but I feel like there's something holding me back. There's usually something deeper underneath the surface. It's not about proving that God is real or feeling that God is real, but what are the narratives and experiences that are contributing to this idea that he's not? And a lot of it, most of the time, is there's some pain involved. There's a lot of logic involved, but there's a lot of that logic piece of just going, I don't want to put my belief in something else that's going to prove to be not real and let me down. I'm afraid of being disappointed if I really believe this. So I think we just get to walk along all those pieces with our young people. I can't make them believe in God, and I can't make them feel God, and I can't fix the desert places of their faith in their long-term walk with God. But I can be with them, next to them, pray for them, and help them find the places that they can see God in their life.
Yeah.
Shelby, what would you say?
Yeah, I think what you said is incredible too. I'll add on. I think that there's a reality that we've turned hope into a feeling instead of like a countenance almost, or like a resolve almost. And so we want to feel hopeful. We want to feel joy. We want to feel something that's not negative, because that's sometimes the internal dialogue or reality of a lot of young people. But I think that as you wrestle through some of these spiritual experiences, being able to help them put language to the ones that they do have, being able to help them discern, what is this actually like revealing to me? Because it's not just a feeling for feeling's sake. It's a feeling to reveal something if they do have those spiritual experiences, because we can't discount that there is a generation that is feeling God, is experiencing him in supernatural ways. But I think on top of that, they see, and people are sharing so openly about these experiences, that there's actually a faith that they have that God could do it for them. Like what it says in Revelations, that the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. And I think that they have this recognition that, like, if God did it for this person on TikTok, then that means that God should or could do it for me. And I think that there's sometimes that wrestle that happens when it doesn't happen for them in the exact same way, in the exact same place. And I think as I wrestle and sit in conversations with students like that, a theology of suffering and having them understand that not everything that we want or desire happens exactly the way that it happens. The lordship of Jesus, knowing that his ways are perfect and so much higher and so much better than what we could ever fathom. And then also that God is such a specific God that he desires to meet each of us in a really specific way. And each testimony reveals the different side of his character. I think that once we start unpacking those things and we start affirming the faith that, like, I see that you want to meet with God. And as we start fanning the flame of that faith, we actually start opening the vulnerability and the openness for them to desire to encounter something, however it may come.
I love what you share about that, because I mean, how many times have we heard testimonies shared that are like these radical, big stories, you know, and we like them because they are radical and big stories. But then how often do I talk to college students or high school students who say, well, I don't really have a testimony because there wasn't the big giant shift, except that it was a shift and it was a big deal. They did come to a place where they were going to follow Jesus Christ, but because we don't celebrate the small, ordinary, you know, non-romantic, like stories,
still small voice.
Then they're like you said, Shelby, they're looking for, well, that's what it's supposed to look like, because that's what I'm told it's supposed to look like. Instead of just the, like, you got out of bed today. Like, for some people, that's not a big deal. But for some people, that's a pretty significant sign of hope and strength.
Yeah.
That's good. I think it also affirms what we were talking about earlier of that, you know, not just the vertical, but the communal piece of it and that experience with other believers too, you know, because I do think when, you know, you're trying to figure it out on your own and you don't have someone to talk to, or you're not seeing what God's doing in people's lives around you, that does put it a lot more just on your own specific experience. I mean, I know when I was young, I remember watching my dad as a new Christian be challenged to tithe for the first time. And it was single dad with very little money. And he was like, I'm supposed to do this, but I don't know how it's going to work. But he took that step of faith and did it. And I remember watching the way that God provided, you know, and watching the way my dad changed, and that changed me, you know, and that was an experience. It wasn't my experience, but I got an experience from seeing him too. And I think, so anyways, that's just to know how that, just in thinking about the earlier conversation, I think that's a piece that's probably really important too. Tanita, I, you know, want to connect a little bit on resources too, as people look at your book. I think one of the things that I thought was cool, and I did use this, is in the What Now section toward the end in 164, you show this table that you created of a way to kind of help people maybe have a lens to think through Bible stories or scripture and go, which of these 7 questions does this maybe address? And then, you know, what might be the response? You said, what is the response or the good news to that? I was prepping a message, and as I was reading this, as I was doing this, I was like, okay, wait, I should ask that. And I found, okay, that for me, the question for this one, it was in Acts, and it was, do all people matter to God? And I was able to pull that in a little bit and use something with that. So I found it helpful already, but I would love if you could maybe just share even a little bit about how that's worked for you, or ways that you've seen that being really helpful as you're connecting with young people. And then Shelby, you know, I don't know if you, in looking through that, if anything resonated with you on that too, would love to give you a chance to share as well.
I mean, I do use that table. Like I have a copy of it on my computer desktop and I print it out and I make my little notes on it. So it's not just something that's in there. It's something I really, really use. In fact, right now I'm in the middle of writing a message around Mark 5, the Jairus's daughter and the bleeding woman. And I have it next to me, going like, okay, do all people matter to God? Okay, am I enough? Like I'm working through it to figure out like, what do I want to talk about in this passage? Because it just reflects these different pieces. So that's really, really helped me to draw out where the scriptures reflecting these things. You could actually use that from any cultural dynamic, right? If you have any culture's ideals or values kind of next to you and you put that in scripture, you can find where the Bible is going to address those things. But it just gives me a little practical way where I could like pay attention, slow down, right? Like slow it down, read it with new eyes, read it a few times. Notice things. I'll often notice sentences that I've never noticed before that I just breezed by that all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness, like this points to this piece in there. So that is, I mean, that's a simple tool in the sense that it's a worksheet, but I use it like a lot.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love simple tools.
I think the cool thing that you put, you just like giving language to some of the heartbeat of our generation too. So sometimes we don't actually know that we're functioning or asking these questions or even answering them sometimes when we give teaching. So as a Gen Z ministry leader, to like actually be able to put to language as we're prepping messages or even in small group conversations, one-on-ones with kids, be like, I wonder, like, hey, are you asking this question? Like, does this feel like it's resonating with you? Like to actually be able to like put language to some of our feelings, because I think that's sometimes where the dissonance happens, is that we are feeling something and we don't have language for it. And so that stresses us out and causes us to spiral. And so I think what you're doing inside of that worksheet, even as we teach and author new conversations inside of students, is like, we actually get to put a language to maybe some of the feelings that they're experiencing or even that we're experiencing as we teach in the lens that we see the scriptures through. And so now we actually get to put some better language behind the things that we're teaching the next generation too.
Oh, I love that. And it's been so beneficial for me. I was doing a talk on Jesus calming the storm. And like, as you said, there's different language now that we have around this. There's one really small sentence where like, they go in the water and then it just says, and there were other boats in the water with them. That's a throwaway sentence for me in most of my years, until you realize like, hold on a second. That means there were boats in the water who also went through a storm, who also saw it calm, but we're not with this in the same boat as Jesus. And so when we start to look at our young people and go, is God like, do I matter to God? Does he care about everyone? Because I can't see him from where I'm at and I can't hear him from where I'm at, except that the passage all of a sudden shows us that in their separate boats in water, not in the same boat of Jesus, they experienced the same thing, but they just didn't have the language or the closeness of where Jesus, they weren't in the same boat as Jesus. So they don't know how it happened. And so like getting to be able to say, have you had that in your life where things were chaotic and they seem to resolve, but you don't know why? It just felt like God was absent the whole time because you couldn't see him or hear him from where you were. Well, here's a story in scripture that actually has that same thing reflected. It turns out Jesus was in the middle of it the entire time.
I love that. Yeah, so I'm excited to continue to dig in and utilize that. And maybe as we are wrapping up, Tanita, I would love if, obviously I want to encourage people to get the book. It's super helpful. What Gen Z really want to know about God, 7 questions about life and faith. So this has a lot of great stuff into it, but I know there's other resources and other things that you have as well. Are there any other things you would just want to share or point people to that could be really helpful as they're digging into this conversation and topic?
Well, you could always jump into my website, right? TanitaMaddox.com, or my social media, Dr. Tanita, like on Instagram at Dr. Tanita Maddox. Because I'm consistently also like looking at Gen Z as Gen Z ages, as they're still in high school, as well as looking into Gen Alpha, what's happening, what's coming here. And so it's kind of I work with young people, so I'm always going to care about young people, but I'm also invested now as Gen Z is starting to grow older and now they're my staff, right? Like how do I adjust how I supervise, how I train, which I have in really significant big ways. My Gen Z age staff has made me a better supervisor. They're making me change. And so all those things I'm kind of exploring and talking about in real life time.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we can put the link to your website, and we'll put your Instagram and link to the book and everything in the show notes, so people can get that as well. Maybe Shelby, any just kind of last thought or challenge from you? Obviously, Tanita has a lot in the book, and we've talked through a lot of things. But anything as you're coming out of this, any challenge from you to people who are listening about how they may think about Gen Z, whether they're in Gen Z, they're working with Gen Z.
Yeah, to the generations above us, I would just say, seek an understanding of the way that we define words. We might be saying the same words, but we define them differently. So as we continue to do life and have conversations, fight to ask the extra question of what do you mean by XYZ word that we're using? So keep pushing in. And when we don't define words the same way, seek an understanding with us. That's my challenge. And then to my generation, to Gen Z, I remember a time where I was feeling misunderstood left and right, and recognizing in a moment that I'm not entitled to an understanding, and that Jesus is a man who's been tempted and tried in every way that we have, yet without sin. And if anyone has been misunderstood, it was the Son of Man put on a tree for us. And so to my generation, you're not entitled to being understood, but when you feel understood, know that there's an advocate that's for you, that's with you. And I challenge you to run to be understood by the one man who knows every single one of your thoughts. And when you do that, there's so much peace and understanding that comes through the lived experience and the life of Jesus. The words on the page become real life when you understand that there was a man that was misunderstood significantly more than you could have ever been, as the Son of Man incarnate, taking on flesh. And so to the generation above us, we need you. Continue to fight to understand that we want you in our lives, even as much as we push you away. And to my generation, keep fighting, even when misunderstanding comes.
That's good. That's really good stuff right there. That's, we'd have a whole episode just right there. We typically spend just a short time at the end of each episode, just taking a moment to kind of pause and slow down and reflect. And we talked just a little bit about this before, but wanted to see if you could just lead us through maybe a short time of reflection. And then Shelby, I'm going to invite you to maybe say a prayer to wrap us up as well.
Yeah, I want to pause and reflect on the young people that are in our lives, whether they're students or coworkers or children in our home. Usually when we're listening to a conversation like this, we start to think of specific faces in people. Mm-hmm. So I would love you to think about one of those people. And as we talk about with our Gen Zers also, when I say this is... If you think that, if you don't know what listening to God looks like, or what his voice sounds like, or if the Holy Spirit's speaking to you, the fact that he gave you a name or two out of all the people you've ever met in your entire life, that's usually a good sign that it's the Lord putting someone on your heart. He's speaking to you. But more than that, so many times we listen to things like this and we think, oh, I should do this and I should do that. So I'd say while you're reflecting, pull out your phone and send a message to that person, a specific encouragement. I'm thinking about you today because I like you because here are the qualities I see in you. Here's how I prayed for you today. Here is why I'm glad I know you. You make my life better because. Listen to the Lord. Take a moment. Send those words to the person that is on your heart.
Jesus, we thank you for the reality that your thoughts are much higher than our own. We thank you that your ways are not our ways. And Jesus, we just thank you that you walk closer than a brother, than a friend. And so we thank you for your witness. We thank you that you are a man who didn't count equality with God something to be grasped, but instead you took the form of a baby, and you humbled yourself even to death on a cross. And so, Jesus, we thank you that you are true, that you are good, that you are safe. And Jesus, we ask that you would create a deep knowing through experiences and through the mentors that we have, through your word and through the way that we encounter you. Jesus, would you continue to reveal yourself to this generation and to these young people? And as we lead them and as we do life with them, Jesus, would you continue to show your face to us? Would we look like you so that when the doors of our life swing wide to the young people who are begging for access to it, that they would see you inside? So Jesus, would you set more tables? Would you invite the stranger in through our lives? Would we be your hands and feet? And Jesus, would you teach us what it looks like to listen and to understand? So we thank you that you are our great high priest. You're an intercessor for us. We thank you that you have many thoughts about us and the people that we love and the people we lead. So Jesus, would you grant us access to those thoughts? Would we have a revelation that we sit with you in high places, and that those high thoughts, those thoughts that are not our own, we have access to as well? So Jesus, would we release those? Would we be people of encouragement over this next generation? Would we not be ones to withhold any good thing from those that we love in the same way that you did with your son? So we bless you. We thank you for this beautiful time and conversation. And would you inspire us to continue to look like you today, tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives? It's in your name we pray. Amen.
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 Well, thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Tanita. What a great conversation.
First a Follower is a podcast from Youth for Christ USA. The views and opinions shared by hosts or guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the official positions of YFC or any partnering ministry. This podcast is for encouragement and general information only, and it isn't meant to provide legal, medical, mental health, or theological advice. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. And if you would like to learn more about how to get connected with Youth for Christ in your area, visit yfc.net.